In 2022, prolonged grief disorder became an official psychiatric diagnosis. We are no longer allowed to be sad. We've created social narratives that say pain in any form is dangerous, and hence if we're not happy and pain-free all the time, we say something must be wrong with our brains. As a result, we're overdiagnosed, overmedicated, fragile where we were once resilient, without the mental calluses to withstand the vicissitudes of everyday life.
Hello and welcome to our session, The Pathology of Everyday Life. Bringing mental illness into the open was hailed as a breakthrough. Today, over half of Americans are comfortable discussing their emotional well-being, with openness and self-awareness now key pillars of mental health care. But recently, both have come under fire. Despite greater openness, rates of anxiety and depression and self-diagnosed disorders have soared across the West. The former chair of the American Psychological Association warns of rampant diagnostic inflation as a result of medicalizing normal behavior, while studies from the National Institute of Health reveal that widespread mental health messaging may actually harm many individuals. With this growing awareness, will the future be one where we shift from protecting people from discomfort to preparing them for pain as part of natural life? Or will we continue to see diagnostic inflation, and will this be a positive step towards our well-being? More radically, should we see mental health issues as primarily social rather than medical? So with me to discuss this, we have, joining us online, Anna Lembke, who's a groundbreaking psychiatrist and addiction expert, best known for her work, Dopamine Nation. Sarah Wilson, right next to me, is a New York Times and Amazon best-selling author, social philosopher, and philanthropist. She edited Cosmopolitan Magazine Australia at 29, congratulations, and founded the global I Quit Sugar movement. Joanna Moncrieff is a professor of clinical and social psychiatry at UCL and was the lead author of a landmark scientific study into the theory of serotonin and depression. She's also a founding member of and co-chairman of the Psychiatry Network and the author of Chemically Imbalanced. Will you join me in welcoming our speakers? Now, as you know, each speaker has 3 minutes to answer the exam question, and each of them is answering the same exam question. And what we're asking is, has bringing mental health into the open helped us flourish, or has it medicalized everyday experience and made us more fragile? So I wonder if we could start with Anna, please.
Sure. I hope everybody can hear me okay. And I'm joining you from California. It's Sunday morning. I wish I could be there in person. But I'll go ahead and get started with my 3 minutes. So I want to begin by saying that the brain is an organ like any other, and as such can become diseased. The brain disease model and the accompanying explosion in neuroscientific research that's accompanied it has contributed, in my opinion, to a deeper understanding of many different kinds of human suffering, from depression to psychosis to addiction, as well as breakthrough medical treatments, including antidepressants, antipsychotics, and antiepiletives, which can be, importantly, life-saving for good responders. But as with all useful heuristics, we humans seem prone to take things too far, and we've now structured entire identities around our mental and medical disorders and created a false dichotomy between the brain and the environment, when in fact most mental health disorders result from a mismatch between our ancient wiring and our modern ecosystem. So yes, we are indeed crazier than ever before, but that's because we're struggling to adjust to a crazy world, not because our brains, for most of us anyway, a priori, are diseased. Our brains evolved for striving. For having to work very hard for a little bit of reward. We are good at pain and we thrive against adversity. But we now live in a world of comfort and frictionless abundance with more leisure time and more disposable income for luxury goods than ever before in human history, even among the poorest of the poor. In the absence of real adversity, we make stuff up. We see ourselves as victims where no victimhood exists, and obsess about enemies who pose no real threat. In 2022, prolonged grief disorder became an official psychiatric diagnosis. We are no longer allowed to be sad. We've created social narratives that say pain in any form is dangerous, and hence if we're not happy and pain-free all the time, we say something must be wrong with our brains. As a result, we're overdiagnosed, overmedicated, fragile where we were once resilient, without the mental calluses to withstand the vicissitudes of everyday life. Being healthy now will require us to do what is counterintuitive for our ancient brains, that is to say, eschew pleasure, lean into healthy forms of pain, and re-engage in the day-to-day work to care for each other and the planet. But at the same time, we need not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can be suspect of over-medicating human suffering while also invoking modern medicine to treat bona fide brain diseases and also potentially to help us adapt to the problem of overabundance. Thank you.
Anna, thank you very much. So you're telling us it's overdiagnosis and also our easy access to pleasurable reward that is making us rather more fragile and ill-equipped to our environment. So I wonder if we can ask you, Sarah, same exam question, has bringing mental health into the open helped us flourish, or has medicalizing a lot of our experience made us more fragile?
I come at a very similar sort of, I guess, slant, but from quite a personal perspective. When I was I was diagnosed with a range of different mental disorders in an era that was just prior to Prozac Nation coming out. So we're talking the early 90s, and was diagnosed with OCD and then what was called manic depression back then, and put on a cocktail of medication. And what I would say is in my late teens, when there was very little discussion around this, it was quite new. It did allow me to flourish for a brief period. And that's something that I will sort of stick to, is that I think for young people in particular, it can be an opportunity to park some of the angst and the discomfort for a brief period so that you can get on with kind of managing a few tangible things in your life. However, I reached a point after not a long period of being on this medication and working to this diagnostic kind of concept where I felt very, very uncomfortable with the idea of being told I had something wrong with me. And I wandered around saying, I don't think I'm mad. I really don't think I'm mad. And what I would say is there was just not the kind of environment back then to be able to discuss things beyond that. There just wasn't the leadership, and I think this is something that we'll probably get to in some of the other questions later. There wasn't this sort of moral discussion as to what was going on in the world, and Anna picks up on this. I mean, we do live in a mad world, and I remember coming across that quote from Krishnamurti. I mean, it's no sign of well-being or good health to be well-adjusted to a sick society. And we have lost the moral discussion, the moral umpires, the moral kind of mentors who can guide us through what we're experiencing in the world. And that was happening, back in the early 90s for me as well. And I took this conversation, wrote a book about it called First We Make the Beast Beautiful. You can probably gather from the title, it's a Chinese proverb, that if we can actually see what anxiety and depression are about and why they exist in nature, then we can start to see things through a very different lens. And it culminated in the talk I did for the Australian National Press Club. It's held in Parliament House. It's a live address that you do to politicians, and it's televised live on the main broadcaster, equivalent to the BBC. And I was asked to speak on the anxiety epidemic amongst young people. I was a young person, relatively young back then. And I twisted it around without people knowing to the lack of resilience epidemic that I was seeing going on. And I felt that, young people weren't being asked, do you really think you're mad? This discussion wasn't actually happening. People weren't being asked this question. And I picked up on a number of themes that Anna sort of mentioned a moment ago. What we're going through boils down to a culture where we are avoiding discomfort. And technology, 70 to 90% of all technology that has been developed in the last 30 years hasn't been geared towards advancing the world, but more to removing discomfort. And we're in a position, I feel now, where we are being cocooned from everything except for real life. And real life is uncomfortable. And all of this, of course, is happening at a time when discomfort is dialing up. It is going to get more and more uncomfortable with, where the world's at. And so we're doing a major disservice, particularly to young people, if we continue to cocoon them. They remain wounds without a scab, essentially. So yes, to answer the question, I think it is very much now rendering us very fragile at a very important juncture in history, and we need to correct course very, very soon.
Thank you very much. So this is interesting. Along with Anna, you're wanting us to lean into discomfort. I think we'll explore whether we can also be obsessive and go a little bit too far in that direction too. So we'll get to that. But let's now ask Joanna the same question. Over-medicalizing, making us more fragile, or is it a good thing that we're bringing mental health issues to the fore?
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your contributions. Very much agree with Sarah and with most of what Anne said as well. But I'd like to start with emphasizing the problem. There are 3.8 million people accessing mental health services in England alone at the moment. That is 6.6% of the population. 1 million of those are children. 1 in 5 16-year-old girls is accessing mental health services. And many more people than that 3.8 million are seeing their GP and being prescribed antidepressants or other medications for mental health problems. So the issue is huge. And the vast majority of those people are having understandable reactions to difficult circumstances of life. They are not suffering from a brain disease. And they are unlikely to get any benefit from the medical interventions that they are being given, and they are most likely to suffer some harm from them, at least in the long run. And this situation has not come about, I don't think, because people have, are just too comfortable nowadays and, haven't got enough to moan about. It's come about because people have been coached into thinking like this. So from the early 1990s, the pharmaceutical industry set out to tell people that emotional suffering was due to a brain chemical imbalance in the individual, okay? And I'm sure they did this partly, I'm sure some of the people designing these campaigns hoped that this would reduce stigma and reduce the shamefulness that people felt around mental health problems. But they obviously did it primarily to sell antidepressant drugs, to sell the SSRIs. And this campaign was incredibly useful and incredibly successful, and has gone hand in hand with increasing openness about mental health problems, which has many benefits, but as I say, has downsides as well. And one of the downsides is that it's just not true that emotional problems can be pinned down to some sort of brain chemical abnormality. Barry mentioned my research on serotonin and depression. We showed that there are no established links between serotonin and depression, and it's the same for every other mental health condition that you can think of. No biological mechanism has been established for any of them, including anxiety, ADHD, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, whatever you care to name. And so it's not correct to think that mental health problems are biological problems in the brain. I think it's also not helpful at least in the long run. I think what Sarah says about it maybe being temporarily useful to enable you to move on is a good point. And I've heard people say that, you know, getting a diagnosis can be a relief initially, and, you know, people think, oh, you know, great, it's not my fault, and there's this answer, and there are these people who understand what's going on for me. In the long run, though, I think it's